My name is Mike Troyan. I'm from the Penn State University. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to stand up here and kind of drive a little bit because eventually that's going to be required. So I didn't bother with the remote. Although I did bring my laser pointer that's shaped like a shark with a freaking laser on its head. So if I need that. So about me, I'm an instructor in the biochemistry and molecular biology department, which sounds more impressive than it really is. And when I sat down to do the math, I realized I've been at this for about 20 years, which kind of frightened me. Probably not as frightened as I was listening to that talk this morning. I almost ran back to the room and redid my whole presentation, wondering if I'm just here showing you a really fancy overhead projector. But I'll just try and get over the shock from that talk this morning. And I've been teaching for a fairly long time, but I've always used technology. Does anybody, and we'll all feel old together then, shall we? Does anybody remember hand coding HTML and, okay? So that's when I started out of grad school, right? And I can actually remember the conversation I had with a publisher one time when I asked them, hey, is it okay if I take the pictures from your book and scan them and put them on a web page? And they were completely freaked out by that. Oh, I don't know, we better talk to legal. I'm not sure that's, oh, we'll get back to you about that, okay? So that's where my roots are, and I've been using the technologies for a long time now, to the point where all of my courses are online these days. When I work at a major university, this has been kind of my thing, so these are the classes I do. And if I'm a little rusty today, it's because I haven't been in a lecture hall in 2-3 years now, so I'm not used to speaking in front of people. But my background is in microbiology and physiology, so this is sciences typically for the non-major student. Okay, those folks that need to take a science, and mine probably doesn't sound as awful as some of the other things that they might be required to take. So they land in my class, and now I'm doing this completely online for adult learners, people from all around the world, military types. So I really did kind of, make a connection with what was being discussed earlier today. So. What we're here to talk about is adaptive technology. And I'm sitting around one day trying to think about how to explain this to you. What is adaptive learning, really? So I did what any of my students would do. I went right to Wikipedia, which of course is where all knowledge of the human universe is contained, right? So I started looking at the definition, and it kind of made sense, and I wanted to break it down into a few big points just to give you an idea what this really is. So this is some kind of education method where we use computers. Okay, good. I can do that. I've been using computers for a while, and we're going to have these things be a little more interactive with the students. So that's one component of it. We're going to allocate resources according to the unique needs of the learner, which is a little surprising because aren't all learners the same, right? So there's a way to actually fine-tune this to make it different for each person. Wow, that sounds cool. And then lastly, the material that the student gets is based on their specific learning needs of the moment, okay? And typically this is gauged by figuring out answers to questions. Okay, so this is a lot like what happens in my office hours. How many of you are faculty, just out of curiosity? Okay, so you've probably had this conversation before. Somebody walks into your office and says, Dr. Troyan, I need help. I'm having a hard time in your class. Okay, what's the problem? What's the matter? I don't get it. What don't you get? Well, like any of it. No. Okay, we're working on this chapter this week. What part? So then you start getting into this conversation with students, right? And you realize that there are some things that they do understand. And there are lots of things that they don't understand. And the next person that's going to come in the door after them will have a different collection of those things, okay? So what this adaptive technology is trying to do is sort of simulate that kind of a conversation you have with the student. Here are the things you know well. Here are the things you need to work on. I can explain this. I can help you over this. This you need to read a little bit more about. So you get into this conversation, the art of teaching that we supposedly engage in. And the adaptive technology is supposed to help do that with a student without necessarily me being in the room. Now, this isn't going to replace what I do, but it can aid students at those weird times when they like to work, right? Anybody ever get those emails at like midnight? Hey, I got this problem. And then at 2 in the morning, why haven't you gotten back to me yet, right? Well, dude, I'm not up for another 4 hours, so don't even think about it, okay? So students like that, I need the feedback now, I want it now. And there are technologies that they can use to kind of help them through that. Okay. So, who makes adaptive learning technologies? Well, there are lots of players out there. This is, in no particular order, just a random scattering of the different kinds of companies that do this. And there are probably companies across the hallway over here that would love to talk to you about their version of this. So Carnegie Learning is an example. Cengage and Newton are two big ones. A couple years ago, the founder of Newton came to our campus and gave a talk and said some truly horrifying things that rocked me almost. I was having flashbacks this morning to this statements about how MOOCs are going to transform education, and in 20 years there are only going to be 10 universities in the entire planet, and just all of these Armageddon-like kinds of statements. But real interesting, forward-thinking kinds of people generate these kinds of technologies, desire to learn, and then of course all the major publishers, McGraw-Hill, Pearson, Wiley. I mean, everybody's getting interested in this game because it works really well for students, and different entities are trying to figure out how to, become part of that. So what I'm going to be here to talk to you about is from one of these guys, McGraw-Hill companies. Okay? Like I said, there are others that do this. Pearson does a fine job. I just happen to kind of like the things that McGraw has to do, and I've been using them in my classes. So let me give you an overview of what the McGraw-Hill ecosystem looks like. There were, what, 3 faculty in the room? Was that correct? Has anybody used these kinds of systems with a publisher specifically? Pearson or Connect, you have? Which, just curious.
Pearson and Cengage.
Okay, Pearson and Cengage. Anybody else have a little experience with these?
Cengage and Late Night Labs.
Late Night Labs, okay. I didn't like them, and I'll explain why here in a little bit. No offense, they're very nice people. I actually met the founders one time, but anybody else use some project or a product like this? No? Okay. So the McGraw-Hill ecosystem looks like this. They have this sort of content management, learning management system called Connect. Okay, and there are a bunch of things that go into that system, that, digital tools that students can use. So publishers have changed a lot. Gone are the days when I was starting to teach where you bought the book, you signed the book, you made the students read the book, and you gave them a test on the book. That was your curriculum. Okay? Well, things have evolved quite a bit from that point, and frankly, I missed the revolution. I got involved in online learning so early that I was building online classes. I have 4 of them now that I built basically from scratch with programmers and art people and flash animations and everything just the way I wanted it. So I got into the business of being my own little independent publishing company, and my department backed me on that and spent the funds to do that. Okay? So I got away from using this old dry book, this overhead projector technology, and did this really cool stuff that I thought was awesome. All right? And I didn't pay attention to the things that were changing in the publishing world. They're shifting now from here's the content in a book with pages to learning tools, things that students can use to help them learn instead of just reading through the book. So this represents an overview of all of the different kinds of things that plug into that. So there are e-books. We don't have a static paper anymore. We've got a digital book. Anybody using e-books in their class? Okay, a few people do, all right. LearnSmart is the adaptive learning technology that this company happened to build. Others have similarly named or themes on the same name. And those 2 technologies have been merged, at least here, to create something called SmartBook, which is an adaptive learning technology that's tied to the textbook. So and I won't show you this because I simply do not have enough time, but basically the students open up their electronic book and start looking at a chapter. And certain sections of that chapter come pre-highlighted. These are the main points. If you're learning about photosynthesis, here are the main points. Go through and read through those things. And then they get kicked into a system where they're starting to be asked questions about that. Okay, based on the stuff you just looked at, can you answer this question? Yes or no? Can you answer this question? Can you answer this question? And students go through this iterative process of reading about things and answering questions about it. Reading some more, answering more questions. Reading and answering. And what happens is the system's tracking everything they do. How long they're looking at stuff, what pages they're on, what questions they're getting right and wrong. And it starts to change the highlighting in that book. Things that are highlighted, you need to read this, turn a different color green. Check. You understand this. But new things that they didn't quite get become highlighted. So it's this kind of an adaptive thing. It's sort of this flagship product. And I only mention it because that's how the thing I'm going to talk about works as well. Okay? And that would be the labs. Okay? In science, I don't know if there are any science faculty here by any chance? Ah, there's my one. Okay. Can you do a lab online? Just going to throw that out there and ask for controversy. What's that? Simulations? Are they good or do they suck? You tell me. We're in the field here. It's your opinion time, right? What do you think? Okay, so we got a couple possible converts here, all right? Whenever I start talking about this, people, throw garlic at me and, pull their crosses out and be gone, you heretic. You can't do science online. You can't do a lab online. Well, the problem was my department head came to me one day and said, Mike, you've built some really cool classes, but we'd like to do this other course that has a lab. Go work on that. What the heck am I going to do? I can't build a lab from scratch. Are you kidding? So this is when I plugged back into the publisher world and started looking around. Companies like Late Night Labs and others. Who's doing this? Is it high enough quality for college students? Will our faculty go along with this? If I propose this, will the nursing department freak out? Because they don't want their students going through an online lab. They should, So there are all these questions. So I started looking at it, and I came across several companies that are doing this, way beyond anything I could possibly do. And Late Night Labs was one of them, and the other was this Learn Smart Labs. It was just in its early versions. So I kind of got plugged in a little bit, weaseled my way into the company of Tad. Hey, let me help you with this. We'll do some reviews, help fix things up. And then I took the plunge and offered, I won't say it's the first, but one of the few completely online science labs. The old-fashioned way of doing a science lab at a distance was to mail everybody a big box full of equipment. Here you go. Now go do chemistry in your kitchen, kind of a thing, right? And that's fine. That is a way to do science. Okay? But by definition, it can't be anything too dangerous, too scary, or too difficult. Right? So people question, well, is that really a true lab experience? So the simulations have matured now to the point, now I'll show you this, that I think you can do pretty in-depth, robust laboratory science just by clicking on things on a screen. Once you get over the fact that students cannot physically touch objects and manipulate things and pour stuff into beakers and have to worry about splashing themselves, if you're okay with not worrying about that or thinking that's an important skill, then you can do science online. Right, now we'll stop talking about this because I'll just keep rambling on and on and on. So what I'm going to do is show you how that kind of simulation, which people have done for a while, has been merged with adaptive learning so that students get a really unique and dialed in kind of experience. This isn't just a matter of, here's a simulation, hit play, which is probably the worst way to do it, or click on these 5 things in order and get the right answer. Okay, there's part of that. But what about the student learning? What do they need to know? How can we bring them up to speed? There are lots of other components to this, and I think this particular system does a good job of working at that. So this is what the program would look like when you launch, and we're going to break away from all this, and actually I'll show you. So what are you going to do in this? Well, these are lab simulations and adaptive learning combined. Okay? That's where it differs from the Late Night Labs that the fellow in the back has talked about. Of course, you can get this bundled with your textbook, with the ebook, those kinds of interactive tools, or not. That's what's kind of nice about this. You don't have to be using McGraw-Hill product. You can be using a Pearson textbook or a book from a different company, Wiley or whatnot, and still have your students doing laboratory activities. Heck, I'm even starting to think about doing lab activities in a course that doesn't have labs? I mean, what about that traditional lecture class? You know, I mean, where I come from, we put 400 people in a big room and give them a class. There's no way we're going to do labs with that many people. But this is a means where you can maybe accomplish something like that. What are students going to have to do? And this is the important part. They're going to learn about the lab by being asked questions about it. Okay? This is where this differs from some of the other things you'll see out there. Rather than hand a student that sheet of information about microscopes. We're going to do a lab today on microscopes. Here's all the factoids you need to know. Okay? Some students already know some of that. Some know a little bit. Some don't know anything. So why do we always throw a sheet of paper at them and say, memorize all this? For some, it's wasting their time, and others might need even more information, a little more help than just reading that sheet. So this is where the adaptive thing will come in. And they don't do any labs until we get them up to speed, so to speak. Okay? Then they can work on the lab simulators, where they have all the equipment laid out in front of them. They've got to start, grabbing this tool and putting a slide on and focusing and making sure everything's adjusted. And so there are all these other kinds of things they'll do in the labs. And these are not play a video for 3 minutes and you're done. Okay? Probably the best student comment I've had thus far using these was a guy who was kind of mad about how much work all this was. Right? And his comment was, I can't believe how much work they are. These things are no joke. And that kind of made me feel good. He's like, I'm not usually in the habit of assigning joke assignments to people, so mission accomplished, well done. But yeah, he was kind of annoyed that he had spent an hour or two, but that's what they would have done had they shown up at campus, right? Okay, so this isn't just some quick little cheesy, watch this clip and you're done, now you've learned some science. And then when they're done, they're followed up again with more questions. Testing, do you understand this? Do you remember why you did that? So there's this whole built-in before, during, and after where the students are really being bombarded with content. Okay. So again, we're going to start with these, what they call probes, or ask questions. And here's an example. I know you can't read it, because I stood in the back of the room. I knew nobody was going to be able to see this. But what we have here is a sequence of events in a lab to do a hematocrit. If anybody happens to know what that is. It's to see how many red blood cells you have, whether it's a normal number or not, whether you're anemic or not. And there's steps in a procedure you do to go through that. So the question says, do you know the steps? Okay. And again, some students might come into my class and they've had a physiology lab. This is a microbiology course, by the way. But they may have had a physiology lab, so they've done these already, in fact. Okay. Whether they remember they did them or not, I don't know, but that's part of the thing. There will be other people who vaguely remember this from high school biology, and maybe somebody who hasn't been in school in 30 years, that adult learner, doesn't remember anything, never heard, no matter what. Okay? It doesn't really matter where the student starts. The idea is to get them to the same end point. Okay? So this is a simple question. Can you put the steps of this lab procedure in order? Yes or no? Okay? And again, the students aren't given this information on a sheet and say, here, memorize, these are the steps of hematocrit. They walk into this blind, and that really infuriates them. In fact, I've had faculty that are kind of puzzled by this whole thing. Why don't you just tell them what they need to know? That's not the point. Okay? The point is we are going to see what they know. Okay? So here's an example. Now, not only do they have to put things in order, they have to tell me how confident they are about that order. Are they positive? I know it, in green. I think so, in yellow. Maybe, I'm not quite sure. Or I have no bloody idea. Okay? Because that's important. Getting it right and having no bloody idea is bad. But getting it wrong and being positive you're right is also bad. Correct? Which is worse? I'll leave that up to you. Almost a philosophical question, right? But this is the kind of information we want to keep track of. Not just whether they got the question right or wrong, which is all a test does. We want to know how confident are you about that answer, because that determines what happens next. Okay. And that will show you what happens next. Oh yeah, the concept here is leveling. The idea is to bring everybody up to the same level. And in this case, I took this test, and apparently I don't know very much about hematocrit. I got one of the steps right, probably by dumb luck. But this is going to tell the system, hey, you don't know this. And that's okay. I don't expect all my students to know the sequence of the lab when they start. Okay? I expect them to know it when they start doing the activity, right? But that's what this is for. Okay? So here's an example where I'm a student, I don't know what the heck's going on. I put things in random order, and the system told me, nope, this isn't right, you got them all out of shape. But it doesn't just throw me to the wolves. This is the point where you jump in with some teaching, some learning that goes on. So over here on the side, different things will come up when a student's missing things. Maybe it's a text explanation, and there is a little coach, you can see her up here in the corner here. She'll pop up and actually talk to the students. I have all that turned off. Little videos will play. Different kinds of learning materials will be presented at this stage and saying, okay, you don't understand the steps of hematocrit. Here, now let's watch a 2-minute video, and it'll explain the steps you go through. Okay? And the student will click, okay, I get it, and they'll go on and they'll be asked other questions. But sooner or later, this topic's going to come up again. The system will remember, okay, that person messed those things up. We've talked about a bunch of other things. Now let's give them another question, a different question about the sequence of events, and see if they get that one right or wrong. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, maybe they're confident, maybe they're not. Gives them a little bit more instruction if they need it. And then later on, they'll come back with another question. So students keep moving through this, right, getting their knowledge sort of filled in until they've mastered the concepts. And this is one of the most frustrating things for my students. There's no possible way to just click their way through this and get done. Okay? Because not only do they have to get things right, they have to get them right with confidence, repeatedly. So some have tried clicking, you know, and you can get data from, you can see how long it's taken. So email somebody who took, you know, an hour and a half to do something everybody else did in 35 minutes. What's going on? You having trouble? What's the problem here? Oh, well, I was just trying to click my way through this, but the more I clicked, the worse it got, you know. So that's part of this. Again, the idea, it's unique. It's adapting to them. It's helping them through, coaching them along. The kind of thing I would do if I was there, but I can't be there all the time to do this for them. Okay? But the computer can. So what I'm going to do now is leave the awful demo and pull up, and you'll have to pardon me because I have to log back in. There's no possible way it was going to keep me logged in all this time. And I will show you what these things look like. Again, my apologies. It just takes a second here to get down to the... Okay, so this is what the McGraw's Connect system would look like. So this is sort of like a, you know, an LMS kind of looking thing. And I have a pair of labs already sort of preloaded here. One I'm just going to show you because it's partly done. The students can move in and out of the system, and it remembers where they were, what they've done, what they've completed, what they have to do yet. And I'm going to show you this one because I've been fooling around with it a little bit, and it's partially completed but not totally done. Oh, it's going to make a liar of me. It's reset itself to absolutely nothing. So this is a lab on basic cell safety kinds of stuff, right? This is the kind of topic I don't even have to talk about the first day of class anymore. I can say, go do this. You're not allowed in the lab next time until you've completed this exercise. So we'll explain to them where things are supposed to be disposed, when you wear gloves, all these kinds of things. But it always starts off with questions. I'm running off the edge of the screen here. So again, there's a coach. She's going to talk. She's going to explain some things. And eventually you get to some questions. Okay? They're mostly sort of the multiple choice, place things in order, fill in the blank. It's sort of low order blooms, but that's okay. In this case, we're just trying to get students up to speed so they can complete this activity and be able to follow what's going on. Anybody happen to know what this one is? Let's just guess and not put an answer down. Locked up. There we go. Anybody want to take a guess? No, I'll just click on something randomly. So again, it said, nope, sorry, that's not right. This is the reason we're doing that. And over here in the corner that's bleeding off the edge because of the way the projector's working would be the explanation as to how this works. Okay? And the students go through these it depends on which lab you're working on, but there could be 15, 20, 30 questions here to make sure the students understand the concepts of lab safety before they jump into completing an activity where, say, how do you wash your hands? It sounds like a silly concept, but if anybody teaches microbiology, the joke in microbiology is we wash our hands before we go to the bathroom, as well as after. I'm sorry if you don't get that, but so there would be more questions, and I'm apologizing because it's not going to let me get to the simulator to show you what I want to do until I go through these, which is the kind of thing that frustrates students and people that are presenting this in a meeting when they only have a few more minutes to finish. So I'm going to leave this. Let me go back and launch the other one, where you might actually be able to see something. Everything takes time, right? Good education takes time. Okay, so this is the one I have partially completed. So some of these things I've done, I can jump right into one. I just want to show you what one of the simulators actually looks like. So this is a little activity where we teach them how to use a scale, how to measure the weights of things. Okay.
Is this flash-based?
Yes. With all the problems that go along with that, yeah. Yeah.
Do you know if they're making any moves to it?
Yes, they are. Okay. Yeah, it's going away. Oh, yeah. Well, when this stuff was being developed 5 years ago, Flash was the thing, right? That's what everybody used. So now that they invested all this time and energy and money, yeah. So, okay, this is a simple little activity. Weigh some powder for me, right? So we put the beaker on. You can interact with things. So it's just a simple activity. Pick up some stuff. So again, you're not scooping into the container. You're not getting the spoonful of sugar, so to speak, and putting it into the thing and spilling it all over the place. But short of that, everything a student would be expected to do in a lab doing an activity like this is here. Okay? And you think those are pictures? That's actually 3D modeling. So it looks pretty good. Okay? So the students go through their activity. There are instructions if they're not quite sure what to do. Students are asked to record data in notebooks, which us scientist types really like. Losing my, okay, they have to do data analysis. I mean, all these labs are a little bit different, but it's this pretty robust sort of activity, just like you would do in class, without physically touching things, okay? But the advantage here is that both before, after, and even during, that wouldn't happen in this particular activity, but there's some that are a little more complicated where, as a student's working through the steps of the procedure, it'll stop and say, why are you doing this? How do you label that? You know, there's certain ways to write the names of microorganisms. Do you write it this way, this way, this way, or this way? So the kinds of stuff that you would do if you were in a lab and saying, okay, now everybody remember, don't push down too hard on this, you'll crack it. Well, the system lets them make mistakes as well. And when they're done with the activity, it will say, hey, it didn't work right. You contaminated it. Okay? Or the hypothesis you were trying to test, this doesn't prove or disprove it. You need a different method altogether. So all of these labs are a little different, a little unique, and like I said, we could spend lots of time going through them. But it's different than some of the other products out there because at every step along the way, the issue is, what's the student thinking? What do they know? Can we test them? What are they doing here? What do they know? Can we test them? Now that they've done it, what do they know? Let's test them. Over and over and over again. And everybody's getting a different set of questions. Depending on how they answered the questions before they did the lab, the follow-up questions are going to be kind of looking out for those problem points that they had. Something they got correct very easily early on, the system won't bother them too much with those. They might shoot a little quick question just to double check that they still understand. But so it's adapting. I don't really know exactly how it works. It's black magic as far as I can tell. But there's a lot of data being captured here as well. And I don't have time to show you the data output, but you can look at individual students and see what each person's doing. You can look at your class as a whole. What are the top 3 learning objectives that they're having a hard time with here? What are the top 2 mistakes that seem to be made when they try and complete this? Those kinds of reports will spit that out. So if you're not teaching an online class, you can go into the lab the next day and say, okay, here's what you guys need to do, or you can contact them by email. And then you can start doing your intervention as the teacher. Okay? But it's keeping track of everything that's going on, so you can kind of get a pretty good idea of who's doing what and what the difficulties are, and then you can help them out. Okay? So again, ran out of time like I knew I would, but are there any quick questions? Yeah.
What's been your biggest challenge in terms of developing the adaptive course? Like, do you have any trouble getting together all the content that you may need to have at different levels?
Well, okay, here's the thing. If you try and build this stuff yourself, have fun, because you got to think about stuff like that. I cheated and ran to the first company that provided what I thought was high-quality product. Okay? I didn't do any of this. I would never want to do any of this. I want to use it. Okay? And this is where the big companies are coming in, and they're realizing, well, if we can do a good product, we're going to have 50,000 students using this. If we charge them each 20 bucks, we'll cover our development costs. Okay? It's not the kind of stuff, this is where I stopped being, I'm Mr. Online Learning, I can do all sorts of things, and saying, hey, I need help. I need somebody else to provide me with tools that my students can use that are more sophisticated than anything I can build. And that's where this came in. Okay. Yeah.
So is it highly customizable, or is it?
Yeah, that's the other drawback. This is what faculty love, right? I don't like that question. I want to change that. I don't want to teach that topic. When you set these labs up, you can, this one you can do volumes of things, weights of things, so you can click and choose which of those pieces you want to have the students work on. Maybe break one lab into 2 smaller pieces, things like that. But you can't pull out one aspect or one question, because again, the whole system's integrated. They're working on this, and here's some questions that need to be asked about this at different points. So if you take one thing out, it's a big Jenga tower. You start pulling things out, then the whole thing doesn't work. So no, it's not terribly customizable, which is one advantage to the late night labs. You can customize anything you want.
It doesn't have the adaptive.
And it's almost, it can't almost. It's 2 different ways of looking at something. It's the way you build them. You're getting different outcomes. Yeah.
Did the company build it to be ADA compliant?
Yes. You can, the little person will talk the whole time. You can hear them speaking, or just it'll read things out. But yeah. 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 So that's the thing. Development costs for something like this are horribly expensive. I can't imagine how many millions they spent doing this. Just based on the few things I've done with my class, just paying an artist to make 20 drawings for me. So yeah, there is a charge, but it's not the cost of a book. In fact, if you are using a textbook from this company, any of the books, they'll bundle it in for a nice cut price, or you can buy it standalone for just a little bit more. It's less than 100 bucks. Okay. It's not nothing, but no, it's not a $250 textbook that thick kind of a thing. Yeah.
Not to be controversial, but
Oh, go ahead.
that possible drawback is that the content is never released to the student. So as the student goes through this, they might have a textbook, but if it's not the test, the quizzes, the content, whether that they created it or whether they've not bought, really rented,
Yeah.
not available to them after they took the class. And your class is so awesome that they're going to want to go back and reference all the material.
Yeah, that's another drawback. Yeah. That's the whole problem with e-texts in general. They have a shelf life. Yeah. Although the flip side is, well, if the students were taking my lab on campus, the last day they walk out the door, I never see them again. It's not like they get to come back in and... I see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. That's fair. Yeah. On the other hand, though, what's different from an on-campus lab is a student can do this 10 times if they want. If we're working on something later in the semester where they're being required to weigh something and they forget how to use the goofy, right, they can actually come back and do this.
As long as the course is still in session.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, within that time frame, that 15-week semester block, they're free to go back and forth and use any of these bits and pieces that they want. But yeah, when the course is over, it essentially, I guess, evaporates into the ether, and yeah. Although, to be quite honestly, that probably is perfectly fine for 99.9% of them, right? They never want to have to think about this ever again, kind of a thing.
That's true. They can throw their nose up in the
Yeah. Team-based online? No. No. I mean, in-class labs, on-campus kinds of labs are inherently team-based, which is, in my opinion, one of the weaknesses of them. Because you know how that goes, right? You got those four guys in the corner. You know, one of them's doing all the work, right? That goes out the window here. Everybody does their stuff. Everybody has to learn, and I know they're learning because I can look at the reports and see who's, you know, figuring what out. Okay? And frankly, I hit them up with a quiz after these. I write my own separate quiz in the LMS. Say, you done this lab? Here's 10 questions. So I sort of have a little bit of a rough measure of what they're taking away from these things when they're done. Yeah. So, any other kinds of pressing questions? Are you just starting to think about lunch now? Yeah. Anybody else ever taught that lunchtime? Which is worse, class right before lunch or class right after? That's a toss-up, isn't it? After lunch, they're asleep, but before lunch, they're not just thinking about food and sneaking out the back door. Yeah. All right. Well, okay. Well, thanks for coming.